Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, how late can you plant wheat to have a successful crop? Ben shows a tool he uses to check conditions in order to get wheat to emerge. Area Sales Manager Brett Ries from the Eastern Illinois and Northern Indiana area joins us with an update on his territory. Brett highlights how the crops in his area yielded this season and what farmers are doing to increase yield potential. And find out what Merschman products farmers are growing in Brett's area.
Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Lynn, our general sales manager, we have Dylan, our agronomy sales lead, and we have a special guest. But before we get to our special guest, I wanted to answer one of the questions that I've been getting a few times this week, and it's kind of on growers' minds as we're reaching the end of wheat planting season, or the cusp of the end of wheat planting season, depending on where you're at in our sales region. Guys are wondering, how late can we actually plant wheat and have a successful crop? So as we've touched on Cup of Joe before, you don't have to have wheat emerged to necessarily have a successful wheat crop. Obviously, it's nice to have the fall tillering that happens when you do have emerged crops, and that definitely influences yield, but there are wheat fields that can be planted at this point in time and still create a harvestable crop that, you know, will add money to your bottom line. So when it comes to emergence and germination, those are two completely different things, as we know, but germination can happen as quickly as like 72 hours with wheat, because basically all that wheat has to do is imbibe moisture into the kernel and then basically set a radicle, and it's got to have enough heat to do that. But I kind of wanted to give a general sense of what it takes to get wheat to emerge. We know with corn, it's somewhere in that 150, 160 growing degree units. It can happen as early as 90 depending on soil temp, and there's some other factors more than just ambient air. But for a 1 inch deep planted wheat crop, it takes approximately 130 growing degree units to get that wheat out of the ground. On a 2 inch planted wheat crop, it takes 175 growing degree units to get that wheat crop out of the ground. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you a tool that I use, and I think it's very useful, is I would go to Ag Weather. This is Eric Snodgrass's Nutrien weather website. And I would go here, and you can scroll down to the bottom where it tells you the 7-day forecast for accumulated growing degree units. And you can click on that and you can kind of look at where you are in the area. So right now, to get wheat to emerge, this map doesn't look all that favorable for anywhere south of Interstate 80. But what that doesn't tell you is that's what's going on the next 7 days. I think we're gonna have a little bit of a warm up here. So there's a second map that I like to look at when we scroll down a little bit further, and it's gonna give you a 4-inch moving map of 16-day GFS estimated 4-inch soil temp, and you can see where we're at on Friday at the time of filming this. You can see the black contoured line is the 50-degree mark, and you can see that as time changes, I think this has 4 updates per day, but you're going to see that 50-degree soil temp line move further south. The blue contoured lines is a frost or freezing line, so that's 32 degrees. And you can move that line all the way out, and you can see once we get into the 4th of November, we're going to experience some warmer soils that are going to push back into that 50-degree soil temp, which will give us a little bit more life in this wheat planting season. So you can push this all the way out to the end of the 16-day. Looks like we're going to see some soil temps in the 40s and even 50s, and it looks like when we are clear out to Saturday, the November 11th, we're going to see more warm up, and that 50-degree soil temp line could reach as high as the northern portions of Illinois. So I don't think the wheat planting season's over. I just wanted to give you guys a couple different tools. It's going to get cold this weekend. We know that. That's easily predictable in all weather forecasts, but I don't think that we have seen winter set in permanently here yet. Would you agree on that, Lynn?
Yeah, I think it's a great tool too as we're looking at this. So this is a benefit for us on wheat sowing, but this is also maybe a decent warning on don't get too rambunctious on putting on your anhydrous here in the next week. Looks good, but we have to look at the forecast beyond that, because for most of our sales territory, we're going to be above that 50-degree line very, very soon.
And this is where we talked about a couple weeks ago. This is where the N-Serve or nitrogen stabilizer is going to be probably one of those products that's going to pay this year.
And we always have that. I mean, it's not, we're not talking about any new phenomenon that we don't have within, Brett's area, our area. We have this kind of fall summer that happens sometime in the month of November where we kind of fret about the weather, but we always seem to be quite okay. And then Mother Nature decides to flip a switch and we have winter-like conditions. So
that's right. Well, you've already mentioned him, so why don't you go ahead and introduce a special guest?
Yeah. So today we are very fortunate to have Brett Ries on the hook for us. He is located in Clinton, Illinois, and serves Merschman Seeds and what we call our Area 7, which covers the eastern portion of Illinois as well as the northern portion of Indiana. And in those travels, he's definitely been hot and heavy on the road since he joined us from the retail world. And Brett, just, I guess, give us a little bit of a kind of a synopsis of what's going on in your area and how the countryside looks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Mainly harvest is kind of dwindling down. A lot of guys have a majority of their beans out. There's still a few more beans to go yet. Guys are concentrating on corn, pretty hot and heavy. In my local area around Clinton, there's quite a few fields that are out. The yields, guys are pleasantly surprised with their yields based on the growing season that we had, with the lack of rainfall, with just the planting season that we had. I was talking to several guys yesterday that they asked where'd this yield come from, and there's a lot of theories out there, but yeah, the yield has been surprising to most everybody.
You've been in the ag world long enough, Brett. Where do you think the yield's coming from?
So I have a theory. I don't know if it's more of a common sense theory. So we had that smoke cover that we had this summer, and we've had kind of a cooler than normal summer. I think that plays into it somewhat. With the amount of carbon. I mean, if you look at the air quality that we had for, several days in June, plants love carbon. We don't, but plants love carbon. I don't know. I just think something's there that kind of helped with the carbon uptake in plants.
Oh, I definitely think there's something about that. Iowa State has a couple different things that are in their winter meetings that they're highlighting that, and I'll be really interested to see what some of the professors have to talk about that as well.
I think that other point that's really good there is you guys were kind of in the same boat as us. The plants were able to go through respiration at night when they were able to cool off, where some of our other areas just stayed, unfortunately blazing hot day to night. There wasn't a lot of transition in between time to take the stress off that plant.
And I think the combination of, we got the rains, even though they were late, we got them in a timely manner around pollination, especially for the corn. I think that's where a lot of this yield potential came. We got the timely rains right at pollination. That really helped too.
So turn it over, I guess, a little bit towards the soybean side. Walk us through when soybean planting started in your area, and how the season progressed, and what were some of the stresses, and how things actually turned out.
So planting started here as early as the Monday after Easter, which was April 11th. And you had a mixed bag. We had a lot of guys that were planting beans early. There's enough data out there that shows the advantage of planting beans early. Then we got some rains that kept us out. Soil conditions were good right after Easter, and then again in May is kind of where everything wrapped up. We had a really early planting season in Illinois compared to previous years. through the season. Then we turned off dry. I mean, we didn't get any rain until the end of June, where we were a lot of guys, including myself, were, is this going to be another 2012 with the lack of rain that we were getting? And Ben, you kind of covered it on a previous Cup of Joe. That, I mean, the moisture that we had out there as compared to 2012, we had more out there than what we initially thought. But that was definitely a concern on growers' minds. Are we looking at, another potential drought season? And then the rains came the end of June into July, and it seemed like the timely rains that we got from then on out kind of saved us too.
And I think we're kind of seeing that here in kind of southeast Iowa too, is that those early planted beans, they had that extra edge, maybe a bushel or two better, but then that kind of adds up over time in a whole field situation. So
Right. So what are the yields compared in your guys' area for the April versus the guys that had to wait until they got back in May? Is there a 4 bushel advantage, 5 bushel advantage? What are you seeing?
So I would say that 4 to 5 bushel, and it really all depends. It was really scattered too. The rains. You go, 45 miles south of here, and they were sub 15 inches of rain for the season, but they were still making, 60, 65 bushel beans. In our area, I mean, we've had, as far as 20 miles north, we had 93. We had Apaches that did 93 bushel the acre. You go east, we had beans that were in the mid 90s to mid 80s. The lowest for my immediate area, around Clinton, 75 was the lowest. Where, I mean, last year that same grower was averaging 65. So he had a 10 bushel advantage year over year, and with the growing season that we had, was pleasantly surprised.
That's great.
yeah, so then I guess kind of another question is, like, fungicide is becoming so much more popular everywhere you go. What are you kind of seeing on both the corn and soybean side? Is it paying?
So soybeans, I mean, the data for the last probably 6 to 8 years has shown that fungicide on soybeans is kind of a no-brainer. It pays year over year, especially in our area too. We're seeing the same thing. We're seeing anywhere from 7 to 10 bushel difference in fungicide on beans. The corn, I'd say in this area, you're kind of a third and a third. So you've got a third of the guys that they don't want to spray fungicide. You have a third of the guys that they'll spray it if there's disease out there. And then you have a third of the guys that spray it every year, irregardless. I think that number is shifting, especially after, we had our tar spot year and guys were seeing a 50 bushel disadvantage to not putting fungicide on. Those fungicide numbers, I mean, the local airport here that flies fungicide, I mean, he was booked solid to the point to where he was turning business away because he couldn't keep up with the amount of fungicide that for corn for aerial application. So I think that tar spot year has really shifted those numbers to where it's probably closer to 50-50. Either you're all in on fungicide or you're not going to spray the fungicide, and you're unfortunately going to see a yield difference there, I believe. So when you're spraying fungicide for disease pressure, that disease is already there. I know that's a common conversation that we have in the countryside, and that's more, you're being reactionary at that point in time. You're not being proactive to get ahead of it. And with these fungicides and these active ingredients that these fungicides have, that you can go earlier and you've got residual activity, you're going to see more and more guys that are spraying fungicide on their corn and getting the return.
So what was the tar spot activity like? From east to west, north to south, did you guys have hot spots in your area that you cover?
So I had one area that was northwest of Bloomington that it was a one-off. I mean, it was a 160-acre field that he had pretty thick tar spot in. But other than that, this year, I really didn't hear much tar spot. That doesn't mean it wasn't out there. I just didn't hear about it. Locally, the fields that I've scouted this summer is majority of the guys kind of learned their lesson from, I think that was 3 years ago, when we had the heavy tar spot infestation, and the guys that sprayed fungicide, you're always going to have tar spot late in the season. It's whether or not it's yield limiting or not. This year, I didn't see any real yield limiting tar spot in our area.
Oh, that's definitely good, but I think I would have to agree. Every field has it in some capacity that I've walked or ridden in combines or went and done biopsies and tried to figure out what happened. Every field has it. It's just a matter of, are you going to have enough wet days, and how early is it going to set in, and how proactive do you have to be to be out there with that fungicide application?
How proactive do you have to be, Ben?
Well, I'm a big proponent of early, when the conditions are right. So
germination for you.
Well, maybe.
All right, Brett. So shifting gears a little bit here. For those folks that aren't familiar, could you give us just a little bit of the beans that are planted in your area from a maturity standpoint? What's the range, and then also on corn, kind of what's your hybrid range from your relative maturity on that? And then to take it a step further, make you sweat a little bit, could you give us maybe one product in the bean lineup and one product in the corn lineup that you're really excited about for the 2024 sales season?
Yeah. So for my territory, the range is on the early side, we have 2.5s, to the late side to 3.8s. That covers about the majority range, north to south, east to west, in the maturity for us. And corn, we're 108 to 115 day corn, depending on the area that you're in. The varieties and hybrids that I'm excited about, I'm really excited about our new 3-1 Lincoln. I've had a lot of interest in that. That's been in a lot of plots and yielded really well. That's been in a lot of field environments too, 30 and 40 acre fields that have yielded well. On the corn side, I would say at the beginning of harvest, I was really excited about our 113 day hybrid from what I saw in plots out there in West Point, and kind of what I was seeing based on the Illinois soil types and what that could do. So to kind of answer your question, Lynn, I'm really excited about two varieties in corn, or two hybrids, 113, 111 day. I think those two hybrids are I think they're gonna compete with anybody out there. And our soybean lineup, Lincolns, McKinley's, Monroe's. I mean, those are rock solid varieties. I have not heard a negative on those varieties in my territory. I mean, I made a lot of phone calls the last month. Hey, how's harvest going? What are you seeing yield wise? What's your best variety? And I mean, those varieties stick out. Guys are excited about those varieties moving forward.
So in one of our little, I guess before we were filming here, you were kind of talking about how certain guys are planting earlier varieties. You want to hit on that just a little bit? Like, you're in the same latitude as us. We plant 3.6s to 4.0s, and your guys are planting earlier than that. Why do you think that is, and what's the method to the madness behind that?
So they're planting, like I said, 2.5s, 2/8, and they're planting them like April 11th was a planting day. And I mean, those beans were going, 80 bushel, 85 bushel, in an area that, is typically a 3.6 or better maturity. I think it's just the earlier variety, planting it early with photosynthesis and getting to the summer solstice. And I think it depends on the year too. I think it depends. Some years that earlier variety outshines the later varieties when it's planted early, and other years it doesn't. Last year was a prime year where early maturities that were planted early in our area, they didn't really yield to what guys were expecting versus the later maturities. I think the weather pattern that we were in, that early maturity, if it's further along during, when we were wet early to when, we dried out and it was protected. I don't know. I guess I can't really answer that question wholeheartedly. I think there's a lot of variables that come into play when planting an early maturity versus a later maturity and your planting date.
Right. Well, it's all when the stress comes due and how much nitrogen mineralization do you have. It's how much water is left in the tank when you're hitting pod fill. A 2.5 to a 3.5, you're technically 10 days apart. And if you run out of soil moisture somewhere between that time frame, it's pretty easy to, if the roots can't get deep enough and you can't get moisture sucked in and you don't have the right weather climate. That's why we really like guys to plant at least up 0.0 to 0.5 difference in their maturity so that you kind of can diversify that risk a little bit. Makes a lot of sense anyway.
So then the last question we'll have for you before we wrap this episode up is what agronomic kind of tips or tricks are guys wanting to try or going to try coming up next year?
So I think you're going to see a lot of guys paying closer attention to micronutrients. Giving that plant the least amount of stress throughout the growing season. This growing season was stressful, and I mean we had pretty surprising yields. I get excited about if we can, micronutrient packages, whether it's boron, zinc, manganese. Where's the uptake in that plant? Where's that plant going to utilize it? I think the target, the last several years has been sulfur and corn. I know we've talked about that, and the lack of sulfur that we're no longer getting from the atmosphere. How are we going to supplement that sulfur? When's the right time to supplement that sulfur? There's a lot of guys that are playing around with, different forms of sulfur, whether that's in the sulfate form or the elemental form. When is it going to be best utilized for the plant, and at what time in the growing season is that plant going to utilize, and the amount? I know, Ben, you and I have talked about, the sulfur use is, we've consistently used 25 pounds as our base kind of sulfur application, to where I think that number is probably ticking up, for sulfur use, mainly in corn and soybeans. It's going to be micronutrient packages, the manganese, the sulfur, the boron, copper in soybeans, I think is a highly underutilized micronutrient, where I think there's a lot of guys out here that are copper deficient and don't quite realize it. So what kind of copper application can we do to the soybeans to make sure that soybean doesn't have a stressful season, and that it can pod fill, it can stack nodes, and essentially equate to higher yield in the future?
Well, hopefully you can get some growers that'll work on trials like that, because we find stuff like that extremely interesting, and we're definitely working on some stuff in the background with next year's trials on Dylan's projects as well, because I couldn't agree with you more on the sulfur standpoint, on the micronutrient standpoint. So I guess we're gonna have to make you stick around and listen to Lynn's corny joke to get us out, and I apologize, but we'll give you we'll get you what do they call that when you got to pay somebody for dangerous work?
Hazard pay?
Yeah, we'll get you hazard pay for the this morning to get us through.
Oh, I got to stay on brand of having really, really cringy jokes here in Joe's absence. So we have a time coming up here where our children really enjoy and get to dress up and run around town and beg people. So to stay on brand here, I will hit you with a little bit of corny Halloween jokes.
There you go.
So, why don't mummies take time off?
No idea.
They're afraid to unwind.
Nice.
And one more, just as bad. What is a ghost favorite horse?
No idea.
A nightmare.
A nightmare. There you go. Well, horses are a nightmare for some of us.
That's your choosing?
That's my choosing. You're right. I can't complain. So, Brett, thank you very much for sticking around through the corny jokes and giving us your 2 cents and an update on what you got going on in your territory. We'll put a tagline if any of your listeners in your area would like to get a hold of Brett and have questions. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to fertility and all things agronomics. So we'll put a link up there for however your customers can get a hold of you. We would like to thank all of our viewers for sticking through this week, and we hope everybody's winding harvest up, and we will catch you next week. Thanks.